Yes.
I'd like to correct something. I was just informed by someone who's more informed than I was about my staff at education. Again, this has been quite some time. I had two attorney advisors, and I think 2 or 3 Schedule C appointees who also reported to me.
I'm sorry, would there be order? I didn't hear the last part, Judge.
Senator, I indicated that I only had 2 professional staffers.
Correct.
It appears that I had 2 attorney advisors, one other than, in addition to Anita Hill, as well as a second professional, and then, in addition to those, 2 political appointees, 2 or 3 political appointees on my personal staff.
Well, Judge, I'm not sure it's relevant, but can you tell? No, I appreciate you correcting it. My point, I'm about to ask you, can you do you recall the names of the 2 attorney advisors?
Well, Anita Hill and Kathleen Flake, I think, was the
Kathleen?
second. Flake.
F-L-A?
K-E, I think.
K. And then you had 2 or 3 political appointees.
Whom I can't remember. That's easy enough to check in the records.
And then you mentioned one other person, the woman who was in law school at the time.
That's right. That's right.
She was not an attorney advisor, but she was one who was in frequent...
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you for correcting the record. I think we're pretty well ready to wind up here, Judge, but it's now the opportunity of Senator Hatch to question, and he says he would like to have 30 minutes, and he's, depending on your situation, he's entitled to that.
I hope I don't have to take the whole 30 minutes, Judge, but I do think that I want to cover just 1 or 2 other points before we're through here today. Judge Thomas, yesterday Senator Heflin repeatedly asked you to ascribe some motivation to Professor Hill's allegations. And I think there is, from the way I look at this record, there are some profound differences in political philosophy between you and her. What I'm about to read is an excerpt of one of her statements that I think is worth putting in the record. Hill said that her initial impression of Thomas was very favorable and she respected him for his accomplishments and concerns for others. She said that she also came from a poor family, so she related closely to his circumstances. She said that when she started working for Thomas, he supported quotas for minorities in employment and federal sanctions against employers who did not comply with the quotas. And then went on. That's the relevant part. Then later, Hill said that she has also seen Thomas change his political philosophy since 1981 to the present, from supporting quotas for minorities in employment with sanctions for noncompliance to no quotas. She is concerned that these may be changed for personal political expediency and may not represent his true philosophy. If that is the case, he may no longer be open-minded, which is essential for an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Senator, what are you reading from?
I'm reading from her statements made to the FBI agents.
Senator, you're reading from the FBI report.
That's right.
Senator, we agreed that we would not violate the committee rules of reading from the FBI report. You and I did that with the remainder of the committee in the room across the hall 2 minutes ago, or 2 hours ago. It's incredible to me that you would walk in here and read from an FBI report when we all know it is against the committee rules to read from FBI reports.
Well, now we're concerned about FBI reports. I didn't agree to that. If you'll recall, I stepped out to use the men's room. Now, which I do with regularity at my age, I have to say. But to make a long story short, how does that hurt anything?
Well, Senator, let me tell you how it hurts. It's beyond the issue related to here. You and I may be mistaken, but I thought you were one who said in the other room that you, having dealt with these reports as much as any of us have, that they're full of nothing but hearsay on most occasions. And the reason why I have worked so hard to keep FBI reports totally secret is because they have little or no probative weight. because they are hearsay. And the way the FBI does their interviews, they walk up to person A and they say, will you speak to us? And the guarantee is anonymity. That's what the FBI tells the person. And then the FBI speaks to the person.
Yeah,
Now, for us to summarily go back and say, as a matter of policy, that we are going to break the commitment the federal government makes to an individual in order to get that individual to cooperate in an investigation is disastrous.
Well, that's precisely my point, Senator. You just made the best argument in the world against why this is the most unfair process to Judge Thomas we've ever had. But if you listened in that meeting, I said, yes, in the future, let's abide by that rule. There's a very good reason for it, but we have to be able to use it here because there has to be some evidence of motivation. And I told you at the beginning of this hearing I was going to use it because there are inconsistencies with Professor Hill's testimony and statements. Now, let's be fair. I mean,
Senator,
these are not hearsay statements. These are statements made by her. But let me back it up further with the statement she made to the press, because it says the same thing, basically.
Precisely. Why don't you ask from that? Ask from the FBI report without suggesting.
Senator, listen. I refuse to accept a process where someone on this committee releases her statement and materials from the FBI report for all the world to see and the newspapers to print and the media to show that are tremendously damaging to the judge because they've been brought up in open forum that had to occur because somebody in a sleazy way broke the rules.
Senator,
Now, no, wait, let me just finish.
I'm going to let you finish, and then I'm going to cut you off real quick.
Well, if you think you're going to cut me off, I think you're wrong. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to pay attention to you as chairman. But let me just finish. And this is all I'm going to say about it, and I won't read any more from that particular report. But I am going to read from the newspaper. But let me tell you something. This never had to occur. If the senator, if whoever did this was honest, they could have brought this up before the vote. We could have decided this matter. We could have determined to have executive session hearings, and you know that, and you would have done it. I don't find any fault with you, and I don't find fault with you feeling this way now, but I felt this way from the beginning, and I know you did. But those are fair comments. These matters have been leaked. I don't know that people out there don't have every aspect of the report, and I think some of them probably do, and others. And to prevent me from bringing this up when it's an important point at the last minute of this, I think would be a travesty under these circumstances. I have never leaked an FBI report.
You just did, Senator.
Oh, no, I didn't. Oh, no, I didn't. I used an FBI report under very fair circumstances, and they couldn't be more fair. Like I say, this is not some insignificant appointment. This is one of the most important appointments in our country. And this is not the Soviet Union. This is the United States of America. And let me tell you something. Well, I didn't mean it quite that way. Let me go on. I won't...
Senator,
you
look,
go ahead. You go ahead.
you.
I'll listen to you. But if I can, I'd like to go ahead.
No one has worked harder or has been more diligent in the 19 years I've been in the Senate about keeping confidential anything that was sent to me as confidential when I was on the Intelligence Committee or FBI reports here. No one on this committee has been more damaged by the leak by an unethical person than me. I fully understand.
I agree.
But to turn around now and to decide that because somebody was unethical about releasing not an FBI report, not an affidavit, but a memorandum from a woman who asked it to be confidential, and suggesting that from that point on it means that anything that appears in an FBI report, including in the FBI report on matters had to do with Mr. Thomas or any of the witnesses who were spoken to is inappropriate. Now, I sincerely hope we won't go through this again.
Well, no, wait,
Mr.
wait.
Chairman.
I'd like the time shut off.
Mr. Chairman, let me say a word, because I agree with what you just said. I also agree that this is most unfair, and I think the senator from Utah has pointed that out. I think a number of us have pointed that out, even members who have already taken a position in opposition to Judge Thomas, that this thing is unfair because of the unauthorized leak. And but I do not believe that the old saying, two wrongs make a right. To do it again, I think, is improper. And the only thing that I differ with you, Mr. Chairman, in your statement is that no one has been hurt more than you on unauthorized leak, because
No,
I
no,
take
I meant
exception.
in this matter
I
of
know,
this
I understand. I just take exception to that personally, I can assure you.
Whether or not,
Mr.
it's
Chairman.
irrelevant whether I was, let me just make this point. If we begin to read from FBI reports the ability of the FBI to conduct further investigations with witnesses will come to a screeching halt.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me just...
Mr. Chairman, may I just say?
Yes,
I think we have done that already. To say that we haven't done that here, I think more than several of us, particularly with Ms. Hill, have referred continually. The record is full of references to her FBI report as comparing it with her second version with more explicit sexual material, to her third version with ever more vivid sexual material, and we have used that several times.
I've used
Various
it
members of this
I
committee
thought
have done
that
it.
if the senator from
And I'm
Iowa,
ready
will
to
you-
go, I'm ready to do what you suggest. I think it's absolutely important that in the future, and I do agree with you, and I don't know, I would concur with what you're doing, and I support that, but I don't remember, perhaps Senator Hatch was not present, but it is a difficult thing. We've injected this entire record with quotes from FBI reports, not the report, a paragraph, a sentence. I've heard it now for three days.
Everybody has. Now, if I
I
could...
yield to the senator from South Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, how would do just eliminate the words FBI from the report and let him go ahead?
Well, let me say this. Let me say this, Mr. Chairman, I said at the beginning, when I raised my voice at the beginning of these hearings, that now that the FBI report has been leaked, it's not fair for the media to have it and not the general public. On the other hand, I agree with your statement. It should never have been leaked.
Senator, do you have evidence that the
Would you
press
just-
has
would
the
you just-
FBI report? You keep saying that. Do you have evidence that the press
essence,
or
they
anybody,
do.
is there any place it's been printed? Is there any place it's been quoted from?
Senator, why don't you let me finish my statement, okay? If you just let me do that, I respect you as chairman. I've stood up for you as chairman. I said this hasn't been your fault, it hasn't been your doing, and I believe it. Now, and I believe what you're saying is true now, and I hope in the future nobody will leak any of these reports or use them in any untoward manner.
Just take the newspaper, it's in there, same thing,
Well,
go ahead with that.
let me just say what I want to say. That's what I intend to do from here on in. But I'll tell you, to sit here and say that something that is relevant, when I told you I was going to do what I wanted to do at the beginning, because of the unfairness of it, because I want the judge to have a square shake. And I made it clear, I didn't mince any words. I said that's going to happen, and nobody really disagreed with me at that time.
Senator.
And I apologize if you think that I had agreed in that room, but I made it clear to you that in this context, with the unfairness that has gone on, that I thought that it could be used. Now, I won't use it from here on.
Mr. Chairman, are we wasting time?
We are now, Mr. Chairman. Let's move ahead.
Well,
let's move ahead.
you people think you're wasting time. I don't. I think he's been getting Hillary.
Using newspapers, the same thing.
I'll use what I will.
Well, use a newspaper and you avoid the word FBI.
there.
All right, let me just... I didn't hear that. What did he say?
You avoid the word
Will the senator
FBI.
proceed and proceed under the rules, please?
I'll always follow Senator Kennedy's advice. So I use the newspaper. Anita Hill a former special assistant. Now, I think this is in the Washington Post dated Monday, September 9th, 1991, just shortly after she was contacted. Anita Hill, a former special assistant to Thomas at the Education Department and the EEOC, was particularly disturbed by Thomas's repeated public criticism of his sister and her children for living on welfare. It takes a lot of detachment to publicize a person's experience in that way and a certain kind of self-centeredness not to recognize some of the programs that benefited you, said Hill, now an Oklahoma law professor. I think he doesn't understand people. He doesn't relate to people who don't make it on their own. Then it says in this article, if liberals considered him a traitor, conservatives within the administration suspected he was a closet liberal, Thomas said in a 1987 speech. Now, the reason I brought that up, Judge, is because basically what Hill said in that article was that, and what I've brought up, that she thought you had changed your political philosophy and that you had been for quotas and now you're against it. Now, my question is, just the day before the committee hearings began, she was one of your opponents, and that was before any of the charges were aired. Now, is political philosophy part of this problem?
Senator, as I've indicated about other motives, I have no reason to believe that it is not a basis for what has happened to me. It is obvious. There's another comment, though, that I would like to make, and that is that there is no record to my knowledge, and I have no recollection of ever making the statement about my sister in any speeches. That was in one news article in December 16, 1981. The references with respect to changing my position on quotas has been pretty much the same from a policy standpoint since the mid-1970s.
And what is that? Well, I could let that go. Judge Thomas, I take it that she disagrees with you on your stand on quotas.
She disagreed with me when she was on my personal staff on that issue, Senator.
Is that a matter of some contention between you?
I think in the instances, I think she would get a bit irate on that particular issue, as I remember it.
Because she took the opposite position?
That's right.
She was for quotas?
I think she was adamant about that position.
Okay. Well, I think
that's my recollection, Senator.
I think that needed to be brought up. Now, Judge, when the President asked you at Kennebunkport whether you and your family could take what would follow in the process, did you have any idea what you were going to have to, quote, take, unquote? Could you have guessed that some people, including people on this committee, people in the media, and others, would dredge up stories about drug use, wife beating, advocating Louis Farrakhan's anti-Semitism, lying about your neutrality in Roe versus Wade, sexual harassment, maybe even implications of other things. Did you think you'd have to face scurrilous accusations like those which you have refuted?
Senator, I expected it to be bad. And I expected the awful treatment throughout the process. I expected to be a sitting duck for the interest groups. I expected them to attempt to kill me. And yes, I even expected personally attempts on my life. That's just how much I expected. I did not expect this circus. I did not expect this charge against my name. I expected people to do anything, but not this. And if by going through this, another nominee in the future or another American won't have to go through it, then so be it. But I did not expect this treatment, and I did not expect to lose my name, my reputation, my integrity to do public service. Again, I did not ask to be nominated. I did not lobby for it. I did not beg for it. I did not aspire to it. I was perfectly happy on the U.S. Court of Appeal for the D.C. Circuit, which is a lifetime appointment. I did not expect to lose my life in the process.
In a Washington Post article just today, said that you said, and I recall you saying, you told reporters of reporters sneaking into my garage, interest group lobbyists swarming over divorce papers looking for dirt. I remember you said, this is not the American dream, this is Kafkaesque. It has got to stop. Enough is enough. And the Post article goes on to say some activists were unmoved by Thomas's emotional plea, dismissing it as a last-ditch effort to salvage his nomination. Quote, "The major groups don't have anything to apologize for," unquote, said one of the civil rights activists. He went on to say, quote, "The battle has been fought on policy and philosophy," unquote, although he acknowledged, quote, "it has taken a distressing turn." That turn, the article goes on to say, illustrates the increasingly symbiotic relationship between committee staffers, liberal interest groups, and the news media. It is a phenomenon that accelerated with the Reagan administration's attempts to ensure conservative domination of the judiciary in the 1980s. Many thought it reached its ultimate expression in the battle over the nomination of Robert H. Bork to the Supreme Court in 1987. But within days after President Bush announced Thomas's nomination, liberal activist groups began the search for ammunition they hoped could defeat him. An informal coalition that included Kropp, I suppose he's with People for the American Way, Kate Michelman of the National Abortion Rights Action League, Nan Aaron of the Alliance for Justice, and others began holding almost daily strategy sessions, at first restricting their probes to exposing what they viewed as his track record as a rigid Reagan administration ideologue. Kropp said that his organization, which had played a pivotal role in the Bork fight, I might add, they put ads in the paper. I accused them of 99, as I recall, errors in the ads. Never answered the accusations. Couldn't, really. But Kropp said that his organization, which had played a pivotal role in the Bork fight, assigned 4 full-time staffers, several interns, and 4 other field organizers to anti-Thomas activities. The group also filed Freedom of Information requests for copies and videotapes of all his public speeches and videotapes while he headed the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. Naturally, they can do that if they want to, but these are only a few groups that are mentioned. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of groups in this area, and the groups, many feel, have taken over the process. And in the process, their ideology becomes more important than truth. It becomes more important than integrity. It becomes more important than ethics. It becomes more important than preserving people's reputations. It becomes more important than simple, basic decency to human beings. I think it was said best. Again, I cite Juan Williams's statement. He said, "This desperate search for ammunition to shoot down Thomas has turned the 102 days since President Bush nominated him for a seat on the Supreme Court into a liberal's nightmare. Here is indiscriminate." Now, this is a journalist who is not particularly conservative, but nevertheless a great journalist. "Here is indiscriminate Didn't quite mean it the way some have taken it. He is a great journalist, and I mean that. I don't know how people take that implication, but I mean that.
Tell him his name.
Juan Williams. Here is indiscriminate. He's describing this desperate search for ammunition. Here is indiscriminate, mean-spirited mudslinging supported by the so-called champions of fairness. Liberal politicians, unions, civil rights groups, and women's organizations. They have been mindlessly led into mob action against one man by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. Moderate and liberal senators operating in the proud tradition of men such as Hubert Humphrey and Robert Kennedy have allowed themselves to become sponsors of smear tactics that have historically been associated with the gutter politics of Lee Atwater or crazed right-wing self-promoters like Senator Joseph McCarthy. During the hearings on his nomination, Thomas was subjected to a glaring double standard. Now, for those of you who laughed, why is it that Juan Williams is one of the few who's pointed out this glaring double standard? Laugh at that. Laugh at that. Because that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about liberal and conservative politics. I'm talking about decency. I'm talking about our country, America. Thomas was subjected to a glaring double standard. I've never seen it worse. Never. When he did not answer questions that former nominees David Souter and Anthony Kennedy did not answer, he was pilloried for his evasiveness. One opponent testified that her basis for opposing him was his lack of judicial experience. She did not know that Supreme Court justices such as liberal icons Earl Warren and Felix Frankfurter, as well as current Chief Justice William Rehnquist, had no judicial experience before taking a seat on the High Court. There's a lot more that could be said, but he says a very interesting paragraph, and I think it does sum it up. He said, "This slimy exercise, orchestrated in the form of leaks of an affidavit to the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, is an abuse of the Senate confirmation process, an abuse of Senate rules, and an unforgivable abuse of a human being named Clarence Thomas." Laugh at that. Everybody here knows what I'm talking about. Everybody here. People have tried to make this, and have tried to make sexual harassment the only issue here. Now, sexual harassment is ugly. It's unforgivable. It's wrong. It's extremely destructive, especially to women, but to men too. Sexual harassment should not be allowed. I'd like you to describe now, for this gathering, what it's like to be accused of sexual harassment. Tell us what it feels like. And let me add the word unjustly accused of sexual harassment.
Senator, as I have said throughout these hearings, the last 2.5 weeks have been a living hell. I think I've died 1,000 deaths. What it means is living on 1 hour a night sleep. It means losing 15 pounds in 2 weeks. It means being unable to eat, unable to drink, unable to think about anything but this, and wondering why and how. It means wanting to give up. It means losing the belief in our system, in this system, and in this process. losing a belief in a sense of fairness and honesty and decency. That's what it's meant to me. When I appeared before this committee for my real confirmation hearings, it was hard. I would have preferred it to be better. I would have preferred more members to vote for me. But I had a faith that at least the system was working in some fashion, though imperfectly. I don't think this is right. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong for the country. I think it's hurt me, and I think it's hurt the country. I've never been accused of sex harassment. And anybody who knows me knows I am adamantly opposed to that. Adamantly. And yet I sit here accused, and I'll never be able to get my name back. I know it. The day I received the phone call on Saturday night, last Saturday night, about 7:30, and told that this was going to be in the press, I died. The person you knew, whether you voted for me or against me, died. My view is that that is an injustice.
Now, Judge, I thought it was...
As I indicated earlier, it is an injustice to me, but it is a bigger injustice to this country. I don't think any American, whether that person is homeless, whether that person earns minimum wage or is unemployed, whether that person runs a corporation or small business, black, white, male, female, should have to go through this for any reason. The person who appeared here for the real confirmation hearings believed that it was okay to be nominated to the Supreme Court and have a tough confirmation hearing. This person, if asked by George Bush today, would he want to be nominated, would refuse flatly and would advise any friend of his to refuse. It's just not worth it.
And Judge, you're here, though. Some people have been spreading the rumor that perhaps you're going to withdraw. What's Clarence Thomas going to do?
I'd rather die than withdraw. If they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me.
So you'd still like to serve on the Supreme Court?
I'd rather die than withdraw from the process. Not for the purpose of serving on the Supreme Court, but for the purpose of not being driven out of this process. I would not be scared. I don't like bullies. I've never run from bullies. I never cry uncle, and I'm not going to cry uncle today, whether I want to be on the Supreme Court or not.
Well, Judge, I hope next Tuesday you make it. And I believe you will. And I believe you should. And I believe it's important for every American that you do. Because I think in your short 43 years of life, you've just about seen it all. And if anybody's in a position to help their fellow men and women under the Constitution, then I have to say you are. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for not backing down. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, we're down to senators having 5 minutes, and I will begin to yield back and forth. Judge, let me make sure I understand one thing. Do you believe that interest groups went out and got Professor Hill to make up a story? Or do you believe Professor Hill had a story, untrue from your perspective, that, as referred to here, groups went out and found? Which do you believe?
Senator, I believe that someone, some interest group, I don't care who it is, in combination, came up with this story and used this process to destroy me.
Got Professor Hill to make up a story.
I believe that in combination, this story was developed or concocted to destroy me.
With Professor Hill? I mean, that's a critical question. Are you saying with Professor Hill that a group
That's just my view, Senator.
I know, I'm trying to make sure I understand
There's
it.
no details to it or anything else. The story developed. I do not believe the story is not true. The allegations are false. And my view is that others put it together and developed this.
And put it in Professor Hill's mouth?
I don't know. I don't know how it got there. All I know is that the story is here, and I think it was concocted.
Well, Judge, I know you believe that, and I am not here to be able to or attempt to, at this moment, refute that. There has been an assertion that has just been made, and I want to know whether you had agreed with it, that it's important for us to keep our eye on the ball here. Either Professor Hill had a story that she told someone and it was taken advantage of by being leaked. That's one thing. She says that. And the other story that seems to be being painted now, not by you, I'm asking what you believe, is that a group sat down, decided to make up a story, and found a willing vessel in Professor Hill and got her to say it. Now, they are fundamentally different things in terms of culpability.
Senator, those distinctions are irrelevant to me. The story is false, the story is here, and the story was developed to harm me.
Thank you.
And it did harm me.
Let me go down the line here. Anyone, Senator Kennedy?
No, Judge, we just thank you for coming under extraordinary, difficult circumstances.
Well, I believe he is coming back to answer any other charges, and I'll wait until then.
Senator Metzenbaum?
I have no comment.
Senator Simpson?
Well, it has been a powerful presentation by a powerful person. And I've known you for several years, and I've known Ginny before I knew you. I think it is very well that you were not here to hear the testimony of Ms. Hill. That was a good step, whosever idea that was, that you did not, of course you were not here, but that you didn't watch it. It would have driven you in a way I do not think would have been appropriate. And here we are. You've been before us for 105 days. We've seen everything, known everything, heard every bit of dirt, as you call it so well. And what do we know about Professor Hill? Not very much. I'm waiting for 105 days of surveillance of Ms. Hill. And then we'll see, who ate the cabbage. As we say out in the Wild West, this is an impossible thing. And now I really am getting stuff over the transom about Professor Hill. I've got letters hanging out in my pocket. I've got faxes. I've got statements from her former law professors, statements from people that know her, statements from Tulsa, Oklahoma saying, watch out for this woman. But nobody's got the guts to say that because it gets all tangled up in this sexual harassment crap. I believe sexual harassment is a terrible thing. I had a bill in a year ago of doubling the penalties on sexual harassment. I don't need any test. Don't need anybody to give me the saliva test on whether one believes more or less about sexual harassment. It's repugnant, it's disgusting in any form. And the stuff we listen to, I mean, you know, come on. From the moon. And it is a sexual stereotype. Just like asking you sexual stereotype questions about your personal life. Any woman would be offended by that. About your divorce. You did this, you did that. Talk about in reverse. Isn't a woman alive that would take the questions you've had to take and be just repelled by it? That's where the watershed is here. It is a good thing that this awareness goes up. It is a terrible, tragic thing that it should bruise you. And if we're really going to do it right, we're all mumbling about how do you find the truth. I'll tell you how you find the truth. You get into an adversarial courtroom, and everybody raises their hand once more, and you go at it with the rules of evidence, and you really punch around in it. And we can't do that. It's impossible for us to do that in this place. The chairman knows it, and he has been exceedingly fair. And so here we are, and we will not get to the truth in this process. But there is a truth out there, and that's in the judicial system. Thank God that there is such a system. It has saved many, many a disillusioned person who was, you know, headed for the Stygian pits. So if we had 104 days to go into Ms. Hill and find out about her character, her background, her proclivities, and all the rest, I'd feel a lot better about this system. And I'm talking about the stuff I'm getting from women in America who are sending me things, and especially women in Oklahoma. Oh, that'll all become public. I said at the time it would be destructive of her. And some said, well, isn't that terrible of Simpson? A menacing threat. It wasn't menacing. It was true that she would come forward and she would be destroyed. She will, just as you have been destroyed. I hope you can both be rehabilitated. But I have a couple of questions, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I haven't taken time, and I'll get to that. Angela Wright will soon be with us. We think. But now we're told that Angela Wright has what we used to call in the legal trade cold feet. Now, if Angela Wright doesn't show up to tell her tale of your horrors, what are we to determine about Angela Wright? Did you fire her? And if you did, what for? You said that.
Senator, I summarily dismissed her, and this is my recollection. She was hired to reinvigorate the public affairs operation at EEOC. I felt her performance was ineffective and the office was ineffective. And the straw that broke the camel's back was a report to me from one of the members of my staff that she referred to another male member of my staff as a faggot.
As a faggot.
And that's inappropriate conduct, and that's a slur, and I was not going to have it.
And so you just summarily discharged her.
That's right.
That was enough for you.
That was more than enough for me. That's my recollection.
It's kind of the way you are, isn't it?
That's the way I am with conduct like that, whether it's sex harassment or slurs or anything else. I don't play games.
And so that was the end of Ms. Wright, who's now going to come and tell us perhaps about more parts of the anatomy, I'm sure of that. And a totally discredited, and we just will get to the nub of things here, a totally discredited witness who does have cold feet. Well, Mr. Chairman, you know, all of us have been through this stuff in life, but never to this degree. I've done my old stuff about my past and shared that. I won't get into those old saws, but I tell you, I do love Shakespeare, and Shakespeare would love this. This is all Shakespeare. This is about love and hate and cheating and distrust and kindness and disgust and avarice and jealousy and envy. All those things that make that remarkable bard read today. But boy, I tell you, one came to my head, and I just went and got it out of the back of the book. Othello. Read Othello. And don't ever forget this line. Good name in man and woman, dear my lord, remember this scene, is the immediate jewel of their souls. Who steals my purse steals trash. 'Tis something, nothing. 'Twas mine, 'tis his, and has been slave to thousands. But he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed. What a tragedy. What a disgusting tragedy.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions, and it may take more than 5 minutes. I hope I could just follow them up and get this over with rather than waiting around. Judge, I have great empathy what you've been through. I happen to have a little experience going through a awful process. I think this is atrocious. I went through an atrocious process that I thought I'd never get over. I did, because like you, I had a strong family. I believed in myself, and I did not do the things I was accused of. So I have a kind of a feeling what you've gone through. Mine was not a sexual harassment charge, but I felt just about as bad as you did. I thought I was going to die. Thanks to my wife and family and some good friends, that didn't happen. And when the leaks came towards this senator, I must say there wasn't a howl except from the chairman of the Ethics Committee, who stood up on the floor of the Senate, and the majority leader, and very few other people stood up on the floor of the Senate as they did when the leaks came about you. So if nothing has come, at least for this senator, somebody gives a damn about leaks and breaking the rules. And maybe we'll finally put an end to that I think has caused you to go through what you've had to go through. Now, Judge Thomas, I think the question that Chairman Biden asked you, and you answered it in such a manner that it really is irrelevant how all this happened. The fact is that it happened. No matter whether Ms. Hill plotted it, whether she was paid to do it, whether her conscience drove her to do it, the fact is that it has, in your judgment, ruined your name, and that you died 2 weeks ago. Is that fair to restate your position?
It's fair.
Now, Judge, based on that, and I think that the circumstances that give rise to these allegations against you are, I can't believe I'm here myself. I can't believe that this process is taking place to a United States appellate court judge who's been confirmed 3 times by this body, a life appointment, and you're even here, and I'm even here. I'm ashamed to be part of this process. But nevertheless, that's my job, and I'm here because the Senate said, go back and do it again. And we did it. We did it right, I believe. I think the chairman protected Mrs. Hill as she wanted to be protected. and he did it with the spirit of protecting her rights. And now, I won't go into the press anymore, beat up on them, I guess, enough, but we're here because it was leaked and the press made it. I don't think Professor Hill will ever fully recover from what she's gone through, regardless of what happens to you. And I don't know whether you will. And my question to you is, do you think you can recover from dying 1,000 deaths, having your name and your reputation ripped from you through this process? Can you recover as an individual and serve on the Supreme Court?
Senator, there was also a positive side of this.
Tell me what it is, except raising the awareness of sex harassment, and I don't say that to minimal, but I think that awareness is out there and has been out there for a long time, if I may say myself, and I didn't need this experience to raise it for me, but please don't let me interrupt what you say, the positive side. Believe me, I'm looking for one, I'm praying for one.
During this process, the last 105 days and the last 2.5 weeks especially, I have never had such outpouring of love and affection and friendship. And people who know me, not people making these scurrilous assertions, but people who know me, supporting me and caring for me, helping me to recover from it and survive it. My wife, my son, whose reaction is just to be terribly angry. I think it showed me just how vulnerable I am as a human being and any American, that these kinds of charges can be given validity in a process such as this, and the destruction it can do. It has given me that sense. I think it's also shown people in our country what's happening. I think I didn't want them to see what happened to me. I didn't want my personal life or allegations about my sexual habits or anything else broadcast in every living room in the United States. But they see this process for what it is. And I think that's good. And hopefully it never happens to another American. Yes, I can heal. As I said in my opening remark, I will simply walk down the hill. If I'm not confirmed, so be it, and continue my job as a Court of Appeals judge, and hopefully live a long life, enjoy my neighbors and my friends, my son, cut my grass, go to McDonald's and drive my car, and just be a good citizen, and a good judge, and a good father, and a good husband. Yeah, I'll survive. My question was, will the country survive? And hopefully it will.
And if you're confirmed?
I'll survive. A different person. I would have hoped, Senator, when I was nominated, that it would have been an occasion for joy. There has never been a single day of joy in this process. There's never been 1 minute of joy in having been nominated to the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Judge Thomas, you said, correct me if I'm wrong, after our 10 days or whatever it was, 90 witnesses in your 5 days, I thought you were not just being gracious, but being sincere, where you thanked the chairman and this committee, and as you said today, you would have liked to receive more votes here, but you didn't, and that was the process. But I remember your words is that you said, I think I've been treated fairly. And I have no quarrel or no, ill feelings. Am I restating that correct, how you felt after your formal hearing?
That's right, Senator.
And I can understand that you don't feel that way today. And my question continues to go to the sense of you being confirmed. What does it do to somebody? Does it affect their ability to approach cases as you indicated, and satisfactorily so to this senator, approach cases as a Supreme Court judge? Can you be reborn in the sense of the loss that you have had to suffer here in the last 2 weeks? And how do you cope with it if you care sane? And if you don't, I'll understand.
Senator, there's one thing that I've learned over my life, and that is that I'll be back. The other thing that I've learned in this process are things that we discussed in the real confirmation hearings, and that is our rights being protected, what rights we have as citizens of this country, what constitutional rights, what is our relationship with our government. And as I sit here on matters such as privacy, matters such as procedures for charges against individuals in the criminal context or civil context, this has heightened my awareness of the importance of those protections, the importance of something that we discussed in theory: privacy, due process, equal protection, fairness.
So, Judge, safe to say that what a way to have to come to it. And this senator was satisfied you didn't have to come to it, but you met the threshold for my vote. But what you're saying to us is that through this god-awful experience, you will be more sensitive towards the rights of accused. And that's because your rights have been violated. Is that correct?
I have been an accused.
And your rights, in your judgment,
Violated as
have been
far as
violated?
I think so. Strongly so.
Thank you, Judge Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Of course you can. Senator Zucker.
Mr. Chairman, it's been mentioned here about it's been confirmed 3 times. My recollection is 4 times if assistant superintendent, in the Civil Rights Division, and twice in EEOC, wasn't it?
That's right,
And
Senator.
then the Civil Court, 4 times.
That's right.
So this will be the 5th time.
That's right, Senator.
I just want to make the record straight.
Thank you, Senator Thurman.
Senator Grassley.
Judge Thomas, the thing that keeps going through my mind is all 14 of us sit here and you're being questioned all the time, is the verse about he who is without sin, let him be the first to cast a stone. I know you've gone through a lot of things. I've sinned. I can't cast that stone. And there isn't anybody perfect on this side either. As you stare at us, I keep hoping you think that there are at least half of this committee that voted for you, and that not everybody on this side of the aisle is your enemy. I heard on one of the commentaries on television more than once, and that's why I want to bring it up for you to give a response to, because I think it's got a very unfair message out there. I don't think it's come from anchor people. I think it's come from people that they've had on to make commentary, and not politicians. the parallel between you and Professor Hill is that why would she come forward? She doesn't have anything to gain by coming forward, so and didn't have to come forward, so she obviously would have to be telling the truth. And then in your case, it's implicit that you are lying because you have everything to lose. I would like to have you tell the American people your reaction to that comparison.
Senator, I think that people can rationalize just about anything. I've learned through this process that people have fit square pegs into round holes, and they do it very well and have no problem with that inconsistency. I don't know what Anita Hill has to gain. I don't know. I don't know what goes on in her mind. But I've already lost. I've lost my name. As I said before, I never aspired to the Supreme Court. I'm on the Court of Appeals. I love my job. I love what I do every day. I've lost everything in this process. I'm here not to be confirmed. I'm here to get my name back. All I have to gain from this process is to salvage a little bit of my integrity and a little bit of my name. Nothing more.
You haven't mentioned your grandfather at all this particular sitting. I would like to have you tell me what you think advice he would give to you if he were advising you today.
Well, Senator, in 1983, and this is something that I said during my real confirmation hearings, when I was getting hammered in the public and getting criticized, and I complained to him, he told me to stand up for what I believe in. That's what he'd tell me today. Not to quit, not to turn tail, not to cry uncle, and not to give up until I'm dead. He had another statement: give out, but don't give up. That's what he'd say to me.
Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Senator Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Thomas, most of us have made the decision on the basis that you've asked for. There are, I think it's safe to say, a few members of the Senate who have not made the decision yet, and where what is happening here may be decisive. I read in one of the morning newspapers where Senator Brown was quoted as saying, we have two very credible witnesses. I think that those who, whether they're reporters in this room or viewing it on television, have come away with a good impression of both of you. But obviously, one person is telling the truth and one is not. And it is difficult to determine that. And you look at factors that weigh on either side that in a small way may be measurable. And let me just outline for you some of these factors, and if you suggest that I'm leaving out anything. On your side, the fact that she followed from one job to another. I understand her statement that the harassing ceased and she needed the job, but she did follow. Second, the phone calls, 11 phone calls in 7 years. Some of them can be explained, maybe all of them can be, I don't know. And some additional contact with you, limited, but some additional contact. And while psychiatrists say those who have sexual abuse, this is not an uncommon occurrence, nevertheless, it seems to me those weigh on your side. On the other side is, first of all, the much-discussed question of motivation. She is clearly a reluctant witness, and as I sense it, motivation may be public service. Very difficult. You can stretch, but it's hard to find other motivation. Second, the detailed facts that she comes up with could be created, but it is difficult to imagine that. I don't happen to be a fan of lie detectors, but she volunteered to the FBI that she would take a lie detector test. I don't find generally that people who are not telling the truth volunteer to take lie detector tests. And finally, she experienced stomach pains only one time in her life due to job stress, she says, and her physician at least apparently partially confirms, and that was during this period that she was working for you. Now, none of these factors alone is enough, and maybe in combination they are not enough. But what would you say to my colleagues in the Senate who are trying to weigh this thing and say, what are some more objective criteria that can be used as you weigh this?
Senator, I don't think there are objective criteria in weighing evidence. That's why you have rules of evidence and procedures in courts of law. This is not a court of law. That's why you have judges and finders of fact. That's why you have a careful review process. That's why you have statutes of limitations. That's why you have cross-examination by experienced trial counsels. That's why you have precedents. That's why you have a judicial system.
Let me ask you another question about the process. If you were on this committee and we came up with another similar situation, would we be better off having such a hearing in executive session, without cameras, without reporters, without television sets, in executive session?
Senator, I think you should, in these instances, trust the FBI or experienced investigators. If you don't like their reports, I think you should stop relying on them. I don't think that this body can serve as a judicial system.
But we have to make judgments.
I don't think that this body can serve. This is a political body. I don't think it can serve as a judicial system.
I guess, again, the FBI does not draw conclusions, as you know from you've seen FBI reports. And we have to make judgments. And I don't think, I don't know how we're going to improve the process.
I think that this is clearly wrong.
I think we are in agreement that the process has to be improved.
No, Senator, in the strongest terms, this process can only go one direction, and that is improvement. This is clearly wrong.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator from Colorado, Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Spector's already asked questions. We'll go, if he has any more, we'll go to him later. But
In trying to review what we've had before us, it strikes me that we
have taken on a question that by any measure is very difficult. It's not just that we've had two very persuasive people before us, but I've tried to make some notes as to what it is we're looking at. We're looking at a very serious charge. We're looking at a charge about activities, about very repugnant statements of an extreme nature. And the case is one where there are no witnesses. Normally when you have a disagreement, you've got some witnesses, but we don't have any witnesses here. There's no documentation here. There's nothing we can check in terms of the documents, because there are no documents that were made up at the time. There was no notification. Normally, with an event like this occurred, someone would bring a charge or there would be a notice to the person who was accused. There's no notification here. We're looking at a charge that's 10 years old. It wasn't done yesterday. It wasn't done last week. It wasn't done 6 months ago or 5 years ago. It was done 10 years ago. That's some 20 times beyond the statute of limitations. Statute of limitations, as I understand it, is a number of days, or in some events as long as 6 months. This is 20 times the statute of limitations. And basically what we're called upon to prove, or you're called upon to prove, is negative. You're called upon to prove that 10 years ago you didn't do something. I'm not sure how you do that. I'm not sure how you prove a negative. One thing, I guess, that does come to mind is that you could call in every woman that's worked closely with you and show this committee whether or not you've exhibited that type of activity with others. I mean, that is, it's difficult to prove a negative, but that's one thing to do. As I understand our rules, we have requested that those women be called in. The committee has decided not to allow that. I don't fault the chairman with that. I believe the chairman's tried very hard to be fair. We do have time limitations. But nevertheless, we're faced with trying to prove this question and not be able to listen to them. Now, I also followed up with a letter to ask that we at least require the FBI to take statements from these women who we don't have time to hear. And that request was turned down by this committee. I think that evidence is important and should be taken, but that evidence was turned down by this committee. I have asked, and the chairman has agreed, to allow statements, if these women want to make them, to be entered in the record, and I think that will be helpful. I've also asked that the staffers, who there is reason to believe have evidence to offer here, be called. In talking with Professor Hill, in listening to her testimony, it became very clear that the reason she came forward with these charges is because these staffers told her there were rumors about sexual harassment, and there was an implication that she was involved in those rumors, and part of the reason I believe she came forward was in response to the stories they told her. And to not take that testimony, I think, is just plain wrong. We've made that point, and that request has been turned down. The bottom line, I think, is it's tough to decide this case. I think there are two avenues that we can look at. One, if the event took place, what kind of conduct would it have engendered in her, and what kind of conduct would have engendered in you? I haven't got a complete list, but I think there's a possibility, if the very severe conduct took place, that it could have resulted in a complaint from her. It did not. No complaint was made. Is that determinate? No. There are certainly reasons that complaints would not be brought forth, but it is one question to look at. No notes were made of the incident. There was no effort at the time of the incident to find another job. There was no effort at the time of moving to the EEOC to find another job, even though she indicated that she didn't want to continue on. She made no effort to check for another job in the Department of Education or in the private sector. Even after the incident, there was no effort to cut off contacts, either in terms of finding another job or in terms of even after having left the job, contacts continued. Now, it strikes me, if the incident, as vile as it is described, took place, that there may well be a reason to not continue contacts. There was no mention of these charges when you were up for confirmation in 1982. There were no mention of these charges when you were up for reconfirmation in 1984. No one came forward. There was no mention of these charges when you were up for confirmation for the Circuit Court of Appeals. There are even some reports that have come of her praise of you after the incidents. Now, none of these by themselves determine the issue, but all of them, I think, bear on the question of whether or not it happened. Because if it did happen as vile conduct as it's described, it surely must have affected these 9 specific examples, and I suspect more. That brings me to what I hope you will search your mind for. It strikes me, if this incident happened, it would not only affect her conduct toward you, but it would affect your conduct toward her. What is alleged is that you repeatedly asked her out, and she refused. What is alleged is that you uttered very vile words, and she did not react the way you wished her to. I would like you, if you're willing, to itemize for us decisions you had to make about Professor Hill in terms of job references, in terms of retention for jobs, in terms of pay, in terms of evaluation, in terms of references, in terms of assistance. What did you do in your terms of your conduct after this alleged event took place?
Senator, my treatment of Anita Hill was consistent throughout. As I've indicated, her allegations are false. She repeatedly received promotions as scheduled, as far as I can remember. In fact, she may have been promoted on an accelerated basis. Her assignments for her age and experience at that time, I think, were fairly aggressive. I certainly made sure that when she decided to leave that I assisted her, and I have kept contact with her, not on a regular basis, but certainly returned her calls, and whenever she needed help, responded to that. That's during and after. My conduct is consistent with my treatment of all of my special assistants, particularly those who do a good job. There is nothing in my conduct toward her that would indicate any negative events. Her conduct toward me over the years has been precisely the same. It's always been warm and cordial, professional. This is the first I've heard of any allegations, and certainly as I've indicated, or 2.5 weeks ago, certainly as I indicated, they did not occur. But my conduct toward her is the same as my conduct toward my other special assistants who are successful or who perform well. I would look for, if these events had happened, some disparity in that, and there is no disparity in that. My relationship with her, I think, is at this time or prior to this event was pretty much the same as my relationship with my other former special assistants.
Is there anything you can think of in your conduct that would suggest you retaliated?
Oh, absolutely not, Senator.
Are you back? Thank you.
Senator Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Judge, all of our hearts and our concerns, our sympathies go out to you and your family for the travail which you have undergone here. And I think it's important to recognize that it is a collective travail that extends institutions of government that have suffered. The American people have suffered greatly. Anita Hill has suffered greatly. This has been a very damaging affair, and many, many people have gotten hurt. I don't know as there's anybody in our country who's been helped by this unhappy situation that has occurred and which has brought us here today. I'd like to offer the observation and get the response from you that regardless of all the other reasons that brought us here, things like leaks which should not have occurred without any question, regardless of whatever reasons that we may have been brought here today, there is a single most important reason without which we would not be here today, irrefutable first cause, and that is Professor Hill, the person who is an African American, hired by you, trained by you, promoted by you, a person that you have described repeatedly as smart, tough-minded, resilient, effective. That person leveled a charge against you, sex harassment, a charge that you have said is a very, very serious charge and cannot be taken lightly. And Anita Hill and all that she represents and the relationship that you had with her is what brings us here today. Do you have a comment on that, sir?
I don't agree with that, Senator. I have been exposed to this process for 105 days. 105. I wasn't nominated last week and confirmation hearing set for this week. I think this is wrong. I think this is wrong.
At the end of the nomination process, you said, as you said to Senator DeConcini, and he repeated back to you, you said that you had been treated up to that point fairly.
I was treated fairly, Senator, but this is 105 days. That's a month ago. That's a month ago.
That's 30 days ago.
Yeah.
Right.
This process is wrong, Senator. There's no way, as far as I'm concerned, that you can validate it.
But I don't...
The allegations, anyone can make an allegation. I deny those allegations. I have always cooperated with the FBI. Think about who you're talking to. I have been a public figure for 10 years. I have been confirmed 4 times. I've had 5 FBI background checks. I have had stories written about me. I've had groups that despise me looking into my background. I've had people who wanted to do me great harm. You're talking about a person who ran an agency, 2 agencies to fight discrimination, who, if he did anything stupid like this, gross like this, had everything to lose, who adamantly preached against it. It just seems as though I'm here to prove the negative in a form without rules and after the fact. I think that all this has done is give a forum to people who can make terrible charges against individuals who have to come here for confirmation. Like, this is all this has done, and it has harmed me greatly, Senator. That is not to say that sex harassment is not serious. My record speaks for itself on that. But there is a forum for that. You have agencies for that. You have courts for that, to deal with those. You cannot deal with those in this process, in this manner. What you're doing is you are inviting and validating people making very serious charges against other individuals who do not have the capacity to extricate themselves from it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I still would like to make the point, if I may, very respectfully, that the charge was brought not by somebody that was a stranger to you, but by somebody who was very close to you in a very important job with you for a very long time.
She was not
that's the
there a
only
very
point I'm
long
making.
time, Senator, and it was in 1983 that she left.
Right. Finally, I'd like to say, Judge Thomas, and to all of us who are here today and listening, that this is obviously not what America ought to be. And while we want to get to the truth in this particular case, the truth will be well served if all of us stop and think long and hard about what we are doing to our nation. We simply have to restore civility and decency to the public debate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Specter, and then to you. I hope the principals will limit their questions to 5 minutes or less. They've had plenty of time to question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of more questions. Judge Thomas, the visits which you've testified about to the home of Professor Hill had not been known, at least to me. And my question to you is, how do you square that with your policy of not socializing or not dating anybody in the office? Was there any element of socializing at all in the visits which you've described to Professor Hill's apartment?
Senator, I didn't consider it socializing. It was, of course, it would be more in the nature of my talking to my clerks or talking to my special assistants outside of the office. And I did not consider it anything other than a professional, cordial talk or chat. And of course, she's indicated, I guess, in some communications with the committee that I went over to help her with a stereo. But I would not have considered it socializing.
Judge Thomas, when I met with you on the morning of September 27th, before the Judiciary Committee voted, I had asked you at that time about these charges, having seen the FBI report the night before. And I was asking you about the question of motivation, and you made some comments to me at that time, although somewhat sensitive, I think are worth exploring for just a moment now. And that was the comment you made about a possible concern that Professor Hill might have had regarding your dating a woman who was of a lighter complexion. Would you amplify what had happened or testify as to what had happened in that regard?
Senator, I think it is sensitive, and I think enough sensitive matters have been discussed here. I would reluctantly discuss it, but I was merely speculating and groping around for some rationale, and the point that I was making to you is that there seemed to be some tension between, as a result of the complexion, the lighter complexion of the woman I dated and the woman whom I chose to be my chief of staff or my executive assistant, and some reaction, as I recall it, to my preferring individuals of the lighter complexion.
And did Professor Hill not get a promotion that she was working for within your staff?
Again, I can't remember the exact details of it, but I think she wanted to have that position, the executive assistant position. But that's, again, Senator, that is speculation as to what the motivation would be, and I hesitate to even mention it here.
And finally, you had mentioned, but there hadn't been any detailing given to the comment about an associate of yours who classified Professor Hill as your enemy, which you had disregarded because of your overall view of the generalized loyalty of your staff. Can you amplify about what happened in that regard?
Well, there were some members of, at least one member of my staff who felt that she did not have my best interests at heart, and he would continue to, as I remember it, articulate that point of view, and I would again dismiss it.
Did he tell you why he felt that way?
It must have been based on specific things at that time. I don't recollect the bases of his conclusion or his statements, but he would say it repeatedly when he saw evidence of it.
Thank you very much, Judge Thomas. I'm glad to conclude before the red light went on.
Thank you very much. Senator Heflin.
Chairman, I'll just take 30 seconds. I want to clarify one thing. One of the members of my staff thought there might be some misunderstanding about it. I accuse no one of rape, date rape in it at all. And the only thing that I was using as a comparison was that when you have date rape offenses, you seldom have any witnesses, any corroborating witnesses, and I was using that to the analogy that in this instance, we don't have any witnesses or any corroborating witnesses at the fact. That's all.
Senator Leahy.
Chairman, I'll be brief. We could go around, and we're going to be back basically to the same position, Judge, where you and I left last when we, I think, agreed on the fact that there's irreconcilable conflict in the testimony, and I know you feel strongly which way that should come down. I'm not at all happy with the whole process. This is my third term here, and I've sat in 4 different committees that have had confirmation processes of people. Spent more time on this one than any other nomination in nearly 18 years. And I can only gather how difficult it has been for your family, your wife, son, others. You're here with a good friend of all of ours and a tower of integrity in the U.S. Senate, Senator Danforth. I know how difficult it's been for him. I chatted with him briefly this morning. And I do not like at all, as a United States Senator, I do not like at all the way we've been brought here. The chairman stated, and virtually everybody on the committee has supported the position he took of how we got here. I was glad to hear the chairman and the ranking member state that an investigation will be made of where this material came from that was out here. And I assume that that's going to be completed and we will find out. I especially want to know because I got to see that FBI report about 3 days after it was in the newspapers for the first time. I'd like to read them in a little bit different sequence. But we were sent by the Senate to try to find an answer. A very difficult process. And I suspect that everybody watching this is trying to figure out what the answer is, just like we are. Telephone calls I've just been advised into my office, absolutely split down the middle. I would hope that nobody would do it by polls, but would do it by their best judgment. And I would hope that we might find a way where we are sure that when we do a confirmation process, we're always dealing with the facts. I don't know the answer on this one. We still have a long time to go. You can think of 100 places you'd rather be. I can think of at least 100 places I'd rather be, all in my home state. And we may never come to the final conclusion we want. We may never come to the final conclusion. What has happened here? And you know, if that happens, this is even a greater tragedy than many think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me, Judge, say a couple things, and we'll let you go. First of all, this, unfortunately, is not the first time this committee's been presented with a situation like this. It's been the first time we've been presented one that involved a Supreme Court justice. We have other people nominated before this court where there are allegations by former wives of mistreatment and wife beating. There's no appropriate form to resolve that, as you point out. Now, we have an option in that particular case to say, well, we'll send it to the court first. Before we decide whether to confirm this particular person, have the court decide that issue. Believe me, I'd like this. I didn't sign on to this job or run for it to be a judge. If I wanted to do that, I'd be a judge now in my home state. I don't want to be a judge. I hate this job. But all of my colleagues here were telling everybody how awful the process is. I'm going to be completely blunt about it. It's like democracy. It's a lousy form of government, except no one's figured out another way. Now, I can turn around and I can say to this particular person whose wife has come forward and said it's been abused, I can say, I tell you what, we're going to disregard that, and we're going to confirm you anyway. Or I can say, I don't believe it, therefore, I'm not going to tell these fellas, which I have done on other matters unrelated to wife beating. There's been more nominees sent up here with the last two administrations that have had drug problems I've never even told these folks about. Because they happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I take the heat and I'll take the responsibility and I'll continue to do as long as I'm chairman, no matter what these guys think of this process. Okay? Number one. Number two, when an allegation of consequence comes forward, I do not have the recourse to send it to the courts. I have the recourse only to send it to my colleagues. There is no other institutional way of doing it. I made a judgment on this one. My trust was violated by somebody. And then the fat was in the fire. But we'd be in the same position if the day before the hearing began, Ms. Hill, unrelated to any statement of this committee, stood up and held a press conference and said, as I spoke with counsel, as the possibility could happen from the White House, and just held a press conference. Be in the same spot. We could say we're not going to resolve that. Let's put this nomination on hold and send it to the courts. Not a possibility. Not able to do that, no matter what my colleagues who are now telling everybody how horrible this process is. Now let me say another thing. This isn't over. Your grandfather's right. You have no right to give up. There's compelling arguments to be made for you, and they may end up being made by me and others. For example, one of the arguments made against you constantly by those who opposed your nomination is here's a guy who's sought this. He's suckered it. He's gone out and he's laid down for people for it. And he's not dumb. A guy who wanted this in the beginning. I heard people coming to us and testifying saying, you wanted this and planned this since the late 70s. Well, if you planned this in the late 70s and you did this, you're one of the dumbest people I've ever run across in my life. And you don't impress me as being dumb. Your defenders here haven't even been smart enough to figure out to make that defense for you. My job is not to defend you or to prosecute you. It's to see to it you get a fair shot in a system that's imperfect, but it's a good system. Now, everybody points out what hadn't been made here. Every expert that's ever testified before me in this committee on an issue that I do know something about, and I've spent, with the exception of maybe one person on this committee, more time dealing with abuse against women and the surrounding circumstances than anybody else in the Senate. And every expert comes forward and says, there's a pattern. It doesn't happen in isolated incidents. It's a pattern. If there's not a pattern, to me, that's probative. That has some dispositive weight. No one's proved a pattern here of anything. We're not finished yet, but no one's proved a pattern. Again, these people have decided already once and for all they're for you or against you. You need better lawyers. You need to hire me. I'm getting fed up with this stuff about how terrible this system is. I hear everybody talk about how terrible the primary system is. We're big boys. I knew when I ran for president everything was free game. Anybody who runs for the Supreme Court or is appointed to the Supreme Court, to be more precise, should understand. It's not Boy Scouts, it's not Cub Scouts. In the case of the president, it's for the right to be leader of the free world, and no one ever said it would be easy. And whoever goes in the Supreme Court is going to determine the fate of this country more than anybody. For the next 20 years, we're going to have people, scrupulous and unscrupulous, respond and react. And this is not a referendum on whether or not sexual harassment is a grave offense. I said from the beginning, this is about whether or not sexual harassment occurred. And lastly, Judge, with me from the beginning and at this moment until the end, the presumption is with you. Now we're going to hear more witnesses. They're going to come in and corroborate your position and hers. We'll find out whether they're telling the truth or not as best as we are capable of doing, just like you as a judge are when you look them in the eye and make a judgment. So, Judge, this is less directed at you than it is to my pontificating colleagues, Democrat and Republican alike. So, Judge, I have not made my judgment based upon this proceeding because we have not heard all the evidence. And the last thing I'll point out, the next person that refers to an FBI report as being worth anything obviously doesn't understand anything. FBI explicitly does not, in this or any other case, reach a conclusion. Period. Period. So, Judge, there's no reason why you should know this. The reason why we cannot rely on the FBI report, you wouldn't like it if we did, because it is inconclusive. They say he said, she said, and they said. Period. So when people wave an FBI report before you, understand, they do not reach conclusions. They do not make, as my friend points out more adequate, they do not make recommendations. So, Judge, it's no fun, but there are certain things in our society that have occurred that the nature of the offense is an offense that is almost always takes place where there can be and will be no corroborating evidence, and all of us are susceptible to that errant charge. And if you don't think that we're going to see individuals up here charged, individuals in the Senate, individuals in the workplace charged, maybe even not without merit charged. So, Judge, it is, everybody says we know how you feel. No one can know how you feel. That always excites me when I hear people tell me how it feels. Oh, you lost a family. Oh, I don't know how it feels. Oh, you lost this. I know how it feels. Oh, you went through that and they ruined your reputation by it. I know how it feels. No one knows how it feels. But I hope we stop this stuff. The press did nothing wrong. It is not their fault. It is the nature of what happens here. when something goes public, this is not a right and wrong until it comes down to a decision about you. And the presumption is with you. With me, the presumption is with you, and in my opinion, it should be with you until all the evidence is in and people make a judgment. So, Judge, I don't know exactly how you feel, but you've clearly demonstrated how you feel. And some of us, if not all of us here, have an inkling how you feel. And like I said, I ran for this job to affect foreign policy, to affect domestic policy, not to be a judge. If I wanted to be a judge, I'd arranged for that a long time ago. Judge, wait till it's over. It will be over in the next 2 days to make your judgment. You will not be unaffected by this no matter what happens. Nobody goes through the white-hot glare of this process at any level for any reason and comes out unaffected. But Judge, nobody's reputation is a snapshot. It's a motion picture. And the picture's being made, and you've made the vast part of it the last 43 years.
Yes, what? Judge, the chairman's a good man. He frequently votes with me.
Judge, I voted against you. I have nothing to do with this. I voted against you. You and I disagree, like you said, on philosophy as I can best understand it. Judge, go home. Do whatever you're going to do. Thank you for being here. You're entitled to come back anytime you want to come back after we hear the rest of the witness, and no one should make any judgment about anybody till we hear the rest of the witnesses. We're recessed for 15 minutes.